Mr Speaker, I'm pleased to support this piece of legislation. I want to start by acknowledging Minister Finlayson, and I also actually want to acknowledge the previous speaker, Steve Chadwick, because I do see her at a number of arts functions within my electorate of Auckland Central, which I would call the heart, probably, of the arts community. And I just want to make a couple of other comments. I disagree with a lot of what Steve has actually said tonight. And the first reason that I do is I rang this evening someone very prominent within the arts community. I'm not going to name them, but I want to repeat a comment that was made to me about what I asked the person, what is this legislation about? And they said to me, this legislation is about making the Arts Council responsive to the arts community. And that really resonated with me. And I believe at the heart of that is something called freedom. And so the concerns that I have with the previous member that was speaking is that a lot about what we are doing here is about ensuring that as much money as possible goes to these creative professionals, and it's about $200,000, I think we estimate, that will be freed up for these creative professionals. But also it's about ensuring that it is the arts community that are driving the policy here, and not necessarily a whole lot of people that think they know best. And so I think there is a philosophical difference here between what Labour members in the House believe in terms of this legislation and between what the Minister is trying to do. And I think another sort of exciting aspect, which I think is aligned with what we're trying to do in this legislation, is some of the changes that are happening in Auckland. And I've actually had some pretty amazing feedback since we completed the legislative process around the Auckland Council, around the opportunity, particularly within the spatial plan, to start to come together and have a cohesive strategy around the arts and culture, both the infrastructure and the policy development within Auckland. And so I think what we're seeing here is a piece of legislation that is about finally having more focus on what the strategic direction is around the Arts Council, and that is absolutely aligned with what we're doing in other pieces of legislation like the Auckland Council and the spatial plan, and having a cohesive plan in terms of arts infrastructure and arts policy development in Auckland. The second point that I want to make, and the member previous to me made this point, and I disagree with it, is that this isn't about marginalising certain voices, because there will be representatives in terms of Māori and Pacific Island on the Arts Council, and I'm a member of this House that doesn't believe that necessarily numbers equate to better representation. And I believe what this legislation will do is give possibly $200,000 back into the arts community, and we're still going to have that representation, then I believe that that is a good thing for the arts. The other thing that the member sort of raised was around community voices. And I note that there are clauses within this bill, particularly around the provision of community funds to the community. So I think the legislation has dealt with that. The other point that I'd like to also make is an important point, which is around independence. And I do acknowledge that in this bill there is a very important principle which is retained, which is around the independence of the provision of policy from the Minister. And I think that is very important. And again, it comes back to that philosophy from this side of the House, which is around ensuring that the arts community are getting as many funds as possible to those creative professionals, that the independence is preserved and that it is being driven by the arts community, and that also we are being as efficient as possible from both a structural perspective but also from an economic perspective. I think the final point that I would like to make, actually, is also around accountability and transparency. And I think that is actually at the heart of this bill as well, because I know that within this bill there is a requirement around the Arts Council setting guidelines for the collection of funding. And I think that is also a very important aspect of this piece of legislation, and it's aligned with other legislation that this national government has brought in. I think the last point that I would also make is around the arts community and the contribution that they make. And the member prior to me touched on the economic contribution of the arts in this country. And it is my belief that, and I know that the Ministry is doing a number of pieces of work in this area, because a number of the contributions that are made are often intangible, but it is my belief that we've never had proper recognition of that economic contribution. And I see examples of that all of the time in my electorate. I don't think it matters whether it's New Zealand Fashion Week, whether it's film. I don't believe that this House has adequately understood the contribution of the arts to the economy. I believe that strongly, and I know that there is a piece of work happening in that area, and I know how important that is to so many community groups, because often that is a key criteria in terms of any access to funding. And so that's something that I really care about. I also just want to make this point, and it's a wider point, but it's very relevant to this piece of legislation. And someone said to me, and it was really, it sort of came up through the Auckland governance reforms as well, but we have in this country built a web of bureaucracy, in my view, in many areas. And I actually believe there are members across both sides of the House that would agree with that. And someone said to me when I was first elected, they said, "Nikki, the job that you have to do in this House, it's about death to process. You know, we are, as a nation, extraordinary innovators. We often think outside the square. But unfortunately, there are areas of our government that have absolutely been built up in terms of bureaucracy. And the person said to me, it's about death to process. And so I'm very pleased to support this bill, because in my view, we are pushing those funds back to the creative professionals that deserve them. And we are, in my view, we are breaking down some of those bureaucratic structures. I am very pleased to support this bill. Thank you.